Tonight on the Late Debate, why the government is getting its hands on school academies in a shake-up that's not pleasing everyone.
The Prime Minister himself at PMQs last week said that schools should be allowed to innovate, yet his bill is doing the opposite. It is taking away freedoms from schools.
Also tonight, how the Met could be stuck with rogue officers after a legal ruling which infuriated the Commissioner.
It is absolutely absurd that we cannot lawfully sack them. This would not be the case in other sectors where staff have nothing like the powers comparable to police officers.
And ready, steady, grow. Heathrow's boss fires the starting gun on a spending spree as the airport shapes up for a third runway. Hello and welcome to the Late Debate. A big shake-up could be on the way in schools which educate more than half of pupils in London. The government wants academies to fall in line with the way local authority schools are run. That could mean fewer failing schools becoming academies, as well as changes to the curriculum. Labour says the changes will drive up standards for all children, but critics worry it'll reverse years of academic progress.
Don't be too precious. Use the time to create and make mistakes. It doesn't matter. Be experimental.
Learning about textiles isn't for every student, but it's a popular GCSE subject at the Oasis Academy in Coulsdon. 2 decades ago, this South London secondary school was struggling, but in 2008 it became one of the first academies in the country, and today Ofsted labels it a good school.
My 3 eldest that have come through here and have gone on to be very successful with every other learning aspect that they've gone on to now. And the change I've seen in my daughter that is here currently, I believe it is down to the school as well.
But the education landscape is changing. The government's Children's Wellbeing and Schools Bill will impose new rules on academies. The national curriculum will be mandatory, school uniform policy will be less strict, and all teachers will need formal qualifications.
One of the good things about the way that academies have worked is that the freedom has allowed them to do different things and to see things from a different angle. The concern would be, if there are no academy freedoms, is what is the difference between an academy and a local authority school?
Wonderful work.
The Conservatives are alarmed, especially about the national curriculum.
It's not that it's a bad thing, it's that they should be allowed freedom to innovate with it, to see what works. And actually the Prime Minister himself at PMQs last week said that schools should be allowed to innovate, yet his bill is doing the opposite. It is taking away freedoms from schools.
The government's priorities for the new bill were outlined by the Education Secretary in a speech last week.
This is a new era in accountability for schools, a new era of relentless improvement to drive up standards and open up opportunity for all.
Coulsdon is one of 14 Oasis academies in London. It's already adopted the national curriculum, so is less troubled by the proposed changes than some other multi-academy trusts. The charity's founder believes the biggest crisis for schools is the hemorrhaging of teachers, disillusioned by pay and Ofsted inspections.
Can Ofsted change its character? Is it capable of moving to a collaborative model of behaviour? Or do we just need to scrap it and start again? I think that is the biggest question in education.
Ofsted has recently launched a public consultation on a new inspection regime, which it says will be fairer and put less pressure on teachers. Joining me now to discuss that are my guests this week. From Labour, the MP for Hackney South and Shoreditch, Dame Meg Hillier. For the Conservatives, Old Bexley and Sidcup MP Louis French, and for the Liberal Democrats, Twickenham MP Munira Wilson. Welcome all of you. Meg, academies were from Tony Blair's era. He was very proud of them. They're not broken. Why do they need fixing?
Well, what we've got now is a sort of spaghetti mess of schools that are in different bodies, whether it's education authorities or academy chains, single academies, and yet the admissions criteria, for example, are down to education authorities. We've got free schools as well, of course, and there's not the coordination between them is really gone. And there's also a severe lack of accountability for many of particularly the multi-academy chains because of the way that they operate, sometimes got very geographically spread. But this isn't an anti-academy approach. It's saying we're not forcing new schools that have failed into being academies. It might be the right approach for them, but it might not, and that needs to be down to local decision. And nor is it stopping innovation. It's saying we need a national curriculum, but beyond that, of course, schools of all types are welcome to innovate.
So it's not anti-academy, they're not stopping innovation. Are you crying wolf?
Not at all. I think the progress that was made under the Conservative government to empower teachers to make those decisions that are best for their schools were really positive ones. It did build on the previous Labour government's record, and we saw school standards improve across the country, particularly in England. So I don't understand why the Labour government are doing this. What they're saying in practice versus what's in the bill is very different, and I do think in theory they're putting ideology before children's education.
No, it's about standards rather than structures, and that's what the Education Secretary has been absolutely clear about. High standards for everybody and not actually pitting schools against each other just because of the structure that they're
Munira, education's your brief in the Lib
is.
Dems. What would you do if you were Bridget Phillipson?
Well, on this bill in particular, I would ask, what is the government actually trying to fix? When you heard in that video from Steve Chalk from Oasis, actually the biggest problems facing our schools is the crisis in special educational needs provision. If you speak to any parent with a special educational needs child, trying to get the support they need is impossible. The fact that we are not recruiting enough teachers and we're losing them hand over fist, the fact that children aren't even turning up to school, the fact that schools just don't have enough money, these are the day-to-day problems, the big fires that need to be put out. I don't quite understand why the government's decided to make these academies provisions, but what the Liberal Democrats have done, and I've been very deeply involved in this bill, has been to try and be a constructive opposition to improve the legislation, because actually there's lots of parts of the bill that haven't been talked about very much about keeping children safe, and unfortunately the Conservatives tried to play politics and kill off the bill altogether back in January, making it about grooming gangs, when actually we're trying to improve safety for children. And on academies specifically, yes, I do have some concerns about how some of the freedoms are being attacked, and that's why actually the Liberal Democrats were the first ones to table an amendment to say, the provisions on pay should be a floor, not a ceiling, and then the government followed our lead.
The government has rowed back on that.
Yes,
they're not going to impose
so now the government,
local authority pay
after I tabled my amendment, the government then followed with their own amendment. But there are other measures in the bill that actually I do welcome. So, for example, local authorities working more closely with schools, whether they're academy schools or local authority schools, or making sure that there are the right number of places in an area for the children, because, and allowing local authorities to build schools. In the last Conservative government, local authorities who needed new special schools where we desperately need them were turned down from building them, and now this bill does allow them that freedom.
Let's talk about some of the positive things in the bill in a moment, but Meg, first of all, just staying up with academies briefly, you don't hear many parents of children at academies complaining about them, do you?
Well, look, parents will complain about, if they have a complaint, or complain about any school. There's no magic school model that always makes every school good. There will always be challenges across the sector. But let's be clear, there's some really significant changes that are coming in, which seem to sometimes be swept under the carpet a bit by the Conservatives. There were unqualified teachers in an offer of academies and free schools. And let me be clear, I'm not against academies. We have a lot of them in my constituency, and they have done a good job. But we are saying that actually you should have qualified teacher status. This is not something
Is that right, Louis? I mean, it sounds perverse, unqualified teachers.
No, I think it's a function of the actual recruitment issues that have been in schools, that non-qualified teachers have taken some of the roles. I think
no, it's because it was something that academies were set up to be able to take on.
But Meg, actually, if you look at the Department for Education's own data, the number of unqualified teachers in either a local authority school or an academy school is actually tiny.
Yeah, tiny.
And one of the things we heard from academy leaders and indeed union leaders was the fact that when you come to really vocational and technical qualifications, particularly for older young people like 16 to 18-year-olds, sometimes having a specialist in that profession, whether it's a computer scientist or somebody for design technology, it might be really difficult to find a trained teacher. And for those sorts of roles, actually, I'd rather have somebody who's an expert in front of children teaching those subjects. I have a school in my constituency that had to take computer science off the A-level curriculum because they couldn't find anyone to teach it.
There's nothing wrong with having a specialist, but there's also nothing wrong with making them professionalise their teaching by getting them working towards.
But what you're saying is that there are these teachers who are good, who don't have the qualifications. They're now going to have to go out and get the qualifications.
Well, the key thing is no one will get sacked, but if someone moves job or wants to go into a school, they would be expected, as would happen in the local authority sector to work towards qualified teacher status. And that is something that seems to be that you wouldn't go into any other profession without actually having training about how to do the job.
Louis, is it right that the Conservatives want this bill scrapped altogether? You're going to throw out the baby with the bathwater?
We've got lots of concerns about the impact on the broader education sector. You know, in my area in Bexley, 90% of schools are rated good or outstanding. We have an excellent education offer. And back to Munira's point about the huge challenges in special needs, which I think all parties recognise, we have 2 new schools being built to provide special needs places. And the concern is if you remove the freedoms that academies have, if you remove some of the powers that independent schools and the role they play, particularly in special needs, that you are increasing the pressures on the state system and some of the problems which I suspect we all agree on. The fear is that Labour have put ideology ahead of the practical issues in the education system.
This is not about. This is actually about high standards across the board. You know, the Secretary of State for Education is a byword for increasing the opportunity of our young people. She's passionate about this and she wants to see high standards across the board.
There are reports that she might be reshuffled because she hasn't cracked Ofsted.
I think that's just nonsense. That's gossip. I'm not going to get into that at all. I think
Is Ofsted a big problem?
Job.
Well, we know that there were a lot of concerns expressed, not just by teachers, but also parents about the one-word judgment. So I'm glad that we're moving to a broader approach. I'm not yet convinced that what Ofsted are consulting on is necessarily the right way forward. And so let's see what comes through that consultation. I think what worries me with parts of this bill is there are changes being made to how we hold schools accountable before we've got the new accountability regime. And that is a real concern.
OK, let's move on from schools because a promise to rid the Met of rogue officers was thrown off course this week by a ruling in the High Court. Judges said officers could not be sacked by having their vetting clearance removed. Met Commissioner Sir Mark Rowley blamed Home Office officials for failing to give him stronger powers.
We now have no mechanism to rid the Met of officers who are not fit to hold vetting. Those who cannot be trusted to work with women or those who cannot be trusted to enter the homes of vulnerable people. It is absolutely absurd that we cannot lawfully sack them. This would not be the case in other sectors where staff have nothing like the powers comparable to police officers.
No one can agree this is a good place to be in.
No, absolutely.
Does Yvette Cooper need to put a bit of stick around in the Home Office with civil servants?
Well, this was a court ruling, so I don't think it's about civil servants.
Well,
but
Sir Mark Rowley seems to think it's civil servants in the Home Office who've not changed the rules.
Well, OK. I mean, so clearly what I would say is we actually do need to look at the rules on this because what I believe and understand the Commissioner is making sure they're not going to be on the streets, these officers. So that's but they will be being paid. So this is the least worst option given the circumstances he finds himself in. But look, hats off to him as Commissioner. He came in to root out bad officers in the Met and he has done that very robustly. This has put him back and it definitely needs to be examined. And I'm sure the Home Secretary is looking at this in detail because she's very much in support of what he's been trying to achieve in the Met.
Was the Police Federation right, Louis, to bring this case?
I think it's difficult. I think I think we'd all agree we want the highest standards from our officers to help build trust from the public, which we all recognise is a massive issue in the Met. The vast majority of serving police officers work extremely hard and have high standards, but those that are clearly have issues and professional issues have no place in the Metropolitan Police Force. And I think actually all parties should be doing whatever they can, supporting the government to bring forward whatever changes it needs to do to ensure that officers have the highest standards to ensure that trust is restored in the Met. And sadly, under Sadiq Khan's watch as Crime and Police Commissioner for London, that trust has dropped significantly over the last 6 or 7 years.
So it's not the civil servants' fault, it's the Mayor's fault?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think this is a court case, and when the courts are there, quite rightly in a way, to hold us to account and test the rules and the law and everything. And I think it is important, though, when this ruling has happened, that the Met Commissioner has given every backing to do to finish the job he started, to make sure that only the very best can be serving in the Met. And when someone's through vetting has a problem that's emerged, that they should not be able to be in contact with the public.
Munira, we hear the Commissioner talking about having to get rid of 1,000 police officers because money's tight, and yet at the same time he's having to keep 100 or plus on the payroll. Yeah. It's absurd, isn't it?
It is absurd. And actually, Baroness Louise Casey, when she did her review following the tragic murder of Sarah Everard, she identified this issue as a problem. So we didn't actually have to wait until this court case. This is something that I think Sir Mark Rowley has been calling for some time. Actually, in the last Parliament, Harriet Harman drew up a private member's bill, which I supported, and she had cross-party support and was trying to get the legislative change so that we could get rid of these rogue police officers, because we need to restore trust trust in the Met for all of our constituents and Londoners right across the city. So we need to root out these officers and make sure that we're getting officers out on the beat. And yes, I am very concerned about the cuts that we're going to be seeing coming down the tracks.
You mentioned officers on the beat. I mean, what would your constituents like to hear to give them faith in the Met?
I mean, in general, well, I think what we know is that neighbourhood policing works very well, but we also know that with the financial pressures we're under, there are hard choices, which Mark Rowley's been very open with London MPs and Londoners about, that he'll have to make very big judgments. But there's also huge issues around violence against women and girls and knife crime, which are always going to be a priority. So I think, but the key thing is seeing officers on the beat, but seeing crime solved, that has to be the baseline for what the Met needs to achieve.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, I think in particular in Outer London, from an Outer London perspective, those issues of course are prevalent sadly in certain areas, but actually vehicle crime is a huge problem in my area. We've seen, I think across London, only 1% of vehicle crimes being solved over the last 12 months. It's a massive issue, and one of my concerns is not only was the Met the only force that didn't hit its recruitment target and had to give money back, which cost around 1,000 officers under the previous government, we now have the threat of more officers being lost because of these funding challenges. So the Commissioner, Sadiq Khan, and the government really needs to get a grip of this and ensure that London has the police officers it needs on the ground in our communities doing that vital work.
That sounds like it's going to cost money.
Well, it will cost money to put community police officers on the beat, but we need them there and building that trust and that relationship with communities, because actually it's only when you've got that trust that you can have intelligence-led policing that tackles issues before they arise and tackles crimes, and they know who are the prolific offenders and they can make sure that they're out keeping our community safe. But one of the biggest problems I hear from my constituents is they don't even pick up the phone and report crimes because they think nobody's going to come out and nobody's going to follow up. That is a real trust issue that needs to be restored. OK, let's move on from policing, because few political rows have gone on longer than Heathrow and whether the airport should get a third runway. One village will be wiped off the map by the multi-billion-pound project, while others are partly demolished. The Chancellor thinks it's a price worth paying to turbocharge the economy, and this week airport bosses started getting ready for the day diggers arrive.
I think for us it's a truly significant announcement, because it is the biggest ever investment we have ever planned. So for us it's huge, and I think for the UK it is very important, because this will add to growth of the UK economy over the next many years.
Munira, your constituency is under the flight path. More flights, no third runway or a third runway?
We're absolutely opposed to a third runway, and we will fight it tooth and nail all the way. This is bad for our environment, it's bad for our communities, it's bad for our net zero commitments. I mean, let's not forget, this is a Prime Minister who voted against a third runway at Heathrow, said that when the case was taken to the High Court, the judgment, it was right for the climate, and now he suddenly rode back from that. The economic case is flimsy at best, and Rachel Reeves has been citing Heathrow's own statistics to make her case. I mean, when she talks about 0.43% added to our GDP, which might not happen for a couple of decades, and yet we know Brexit's wiped 4% of our GDP off straight away. I tell you how we get quicker economic growth. It's by reversing the jobs tax, which is the employer's national insurance rise, and actually starting to very quickly rebuild our relationship with Europe, negotiating a customs union relationship so we can cut the red tape for our businesses and start trading again.
Louis, you nodded on the first part of Munira's recommendation.
On the jobs tax, I think this is desperate. This is desperate from a Chancellor that's in deep political trouble. We've seen the impact of the jobs tax literally just flatline growth. Labour inherited the fastest growing economy in the G7. This is desperation. We've got so many questions about...
I don't think you were in Parliament when the last runway was voted on. Would you back it?
No, I think we need to see what comes forward, Simon. I think there's so many, as Munira touched on, there's so many questions about, is this deliverable? What is the infrastructure required? Does the M25 need to be rerouted? What happens to those residents in West London? There's so many questions hanging over this decision. It's very rushed. And it does feel, and I do worry from a taxpayer point of view, who is going to pick up the bill for a potential legal fight between the Labour Party? We've got Sadiq Khan and Ed Miliband perhaps on one side, and we've got Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves on the other. We need to know, what does this look like, and what is the actual solid proposal coming forward?
Meg, you did back the third runway in 2018, 2019. Would you again?
Yes, because I think we need to be a competitive country. Look, we've lost our main market in Europe. There's also challenges with America. We've got to be bringing in those businesses and that international travel as a hub airport. It is our hub airport. But let's be really clear, there isn't a proposal yet. This is government saying go ahead and come back
Heathrow
with a
said this
proposal.
week they would bring forward a proposal.
But they haven't yet. So they will need to bring forward the proposal. And we also need to be continuing to invest in sustainable aviation fuel. And we're really clear that it will only get backed, depending on what the proposal is, if it also meets our climate targets. But so that's, I have met with people promoting sustainable aviation fuel, and there is a real opportunity for us in Teesside and elsewhere to develop that as a real groundbreaking. But that's why we need to look at it in the round, the proposal, that, and then a climate change because it's like a three-legged stool.
The areas around Heathrow have persistently breached their air pollution, the legal limits on a regular basis, right? So in terms of air pollution, in terms of noise pollution, we know there's so much data now that shows that it's linked to poor health and it's been linked to all sorts of health issues, both physical and mental health issues. You've got, Labour set 4 tests and I cannot see it meeting any of them on air pollution, on noise pollution, on net zero and also on growth across our economy. All of the evidence shows that actually expanding at Heathrow, which 61% of the public say is the wrong priority, will actually damage growth in the regions elsewhere around the country.
Well, the regional airports are in favour of having a hub. And when you look at countries where there aren't hubs, the hubs become the places that people travel. We need to be internationally competitive. But, as I just repeat, it does have to meet our climate targets, and we need to therefore invest in sustainable aviation. As you say, we've set out some very clear tests to make sure that they're met before this is delivered, and we need to see what proposals Heathrow come back with, and only then will we be able to have a real discussion about a real proposal on the table.
I think this conversation tonight, Simon, just highlights how desperately rushed out this has been done by a Chancellor that refused and went against Heathrow expansion in her own constituency, has rushed out an announcement because the Bank of England have revised down growth. Growth is being revised down everywhere you look, and this is desperate. This is desperation of the Labour Party.
A green light to say, come back with a proposal. We are going to deal with this issue, which has been ducked by the previous government, both Liberal Democrat and Tory governments, for 14 years. It has been backwards and forwards like a yo-yo, and nothing's moved one way or the other. It's like in limbo. This is the point where there will be a decision made one way or another, and that's really we've got to get to. You just cannot keep leaving things in limbo. That means that countries out, businesses outside, investors outside the country and in the country look at whether it's worth investing on the basis of whether a government can actually make decisions.
But the Chancellor may not be around long enough to survive this political.
Munira, do you think it'll happen in your lifetime?
I hope it doesn't happen, because I just don't think either the economic or the environmental case stacks up. And we've seen actually that it hasn't met any of the growth objectives it set itself in recent years. Most of the passengers are transferring between flights or going out of the country.
Sorry to interrupt you both. I'm afraid we've run out of time. That's all we have time for tonight. Thank you to my guests, Meg Hillier, Louis French and Munira Wilson. We're back next month. Until then, good night and thank you for watching.